Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Forestry Adaptation Community of Practice webinar today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annette Morand, and I am the facilitator of the online adaptation communities of practice, which are run by us here at OKR, which is the Ontario Centre for Climate Impacts and Adaptation Resources, located at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario. So the way the webinar will run is as follows. So after this very short introduction, we will have the main presentation, which will go for about 40 minutes or so. And then at the end of the webinar, we're going to have some time left over for any questions that you might have for the presenters. So if you have any questions during the webinar, we just ask that you please do hold them until the end. And before we get going, I just have a few other housekeeping items to go over. So first, for those of you who dialed into the conference call line, your lines have been automatically muted. The reason for this is just to avoid any audio distractions or feedback during the webinar. So to ask a question during the question and answer period, all you're going to have to do is dial *6 and that will unmute your line. But please do keep your lines muted during the presentation. Also, you'll notice that there's a chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. You can use this chat box to field any questions that you might have for the presenters during the question and answer period. As well, if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can also use this chat area to type your message. Or you can also click on my name and send me a private message, and I will try to help you as best as I can. I also want to mention that we are recording the webinar today, and I'll be sending out a copy of the recording to all those who have pre-registered with me, and we'll also be posting it to the Community of Practice website. And finally, I know we have some people on the line today who may not be familiar with what the Forestry Adaptation Community of Practice, or the FACoP, is. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to quickly mention that it's an interactive online community. It's dedicated to those who are working in forestry or those who are just simply interested in forestry and climate change adaptation in Canada. It includes features such as news articles, events, as well as an online library, discussion forums, and much more. So it's free to join. If there's anybody on the line who's interested in learning more about the FACoP, please just click on the link in the chat box there for more information and to register. So with that being said, we're very excited to have Sylvie Gauthier and Jan Boulanger on the line with us today to talk about future disturbance regimes in Canada. Just so you know a little bit more about your presenters, Sylvie is a research scientist with NRCan's Canadian Forest Service. She received a PhD in forest ecology and genetics from L'Université de Montréal in 1992. Soon after graduating, she joined the Fire Ecology and Behavior team of the Canadian Forest Service at the Petawawa National Forestry Institute as a fire ecologist. Since 1996, she has moved to the Laurentian Forestry Centre, where her research interests are focused on the characterization of past, present, and future disturbance regimes and the factors that affect them, the effect of disturbance regimes on forest dynamics, and as well as translation of this knowledge into sustainable forest management and climate change adaptation strategies. She is also an adjunct professor at 3 different universities and has published more than 100 papers. And we have Jan, who is also a research scientist with NRCan's Canadian Forest Service and has a PhD in biology from L'Université du Québec à Rimouski. Between 2010 and 2013, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Laurentian Forestry Centre for the Canadian Forest Service, where he worked to develop homogeneous regime zones and project future fire regimes in Canada. Since then, he's been a research scientist at the Laurentian Forestry Centre, where his research interests include the projection of future disturbance regimes, the projection of future forest landscapes and habitats in Canada, and the dispersal dynamic of the Spruce Budworm using weather radars. Since 2015, Jan has also been an adjunct professor at L'Université du Québec à Rimouski. So on behalf of everyone joining us, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Sylvie and Jan, for taking the time to present this webinar for us today. It's very much appreciated. So without further ado, I will now hand things over to you guys.
Thank you, Annette. So here we go for the presentation. So the natural disturbances in Canada are very important. Of course, they are shaping forest landscape. They will have an effect on the carbon dynamic of the forest. And you know that the natural disturbance regime in Canada, of course, is heterogeneous from a region to another. You're probably aware of the mountain pine beetle out west. There's a lot of course, wildland fires in various parts of Canada, in the north and central Canada, in the part of the James Bay also it's very important. In in the eastern part of Canada, the Spruce Budworm is another example of an important natural disturbance for the Boulanger and the coniferous forest. And there's also drought in central Canada, which has quite a large effect on the forest landscape and on mortality. Of course, those forests. Well, if I go back to the first slide, of course, those disturbances they are overlapping areas where there is timber harvest. So we can say that in some places, harvesting is almost in competition with some natural disturbance. And of course, the economic impact of those natural disturbances can be quite high. For example, here you have the expenditure to suppress wildland fires in Canada, and you can see that even though if it's in constant dollars, you can see that there is an increase in the cost of suppressing and managing fires in Canada, and it's very variable from a year to another. Of course, it's very dependent on the number of fires in the area burned each year. Another example is the mountain pine beetle in BC. There's a recent study that was done by Corbett et al. In 2015 that says that for the period of 2009 to 2054, the cumulative losses that is consequent or due to the mountain pine beetle can be as high as $57.4 billion in GDP and $90 billion in welfare. So that's really big impact on the economy. Another example is the next Spruce Budworm outbreak, and a study that was done by Chris Henniger in 2013 for Atlantic Canada that is actually estimating that there could be a cost of $90 to $160 million per year just for pesticide spraying, and there will be direct and indirect economic losses of about 10.8 to $15.3 billion depending on the outbreak severity, and it could cost almost 1,000 jobs. So that's really high impact of those natural disturbances. Of course, we can say that virtually all of those examples of natural disturbances are impacted some way by climate or weather. For example, for the fire regime, fire will be, of course, affected by the dryness of, for example, of the fuel, which is a consequence of the high temperature, for example, and low precipitation. That's the same for example, the Spruce Budworm, where climate would have an effect on both the forest, on the budworm itself, and on natural enemies. And so the impact of climate and weather will be quite complex to examine for a given species. But of course, it's not always the same attributes of climate or weather that will affect the pest species in the same way. So it will be quite different, and that's why it's really important to build models that will explain the impact of climate or weather for a given species. So, of course, if climate and weather has an impact on the dynamic of natural disturbance, you can see that probably climate change will have an impact, of course. If we look at the projections of climate and temperature and annual mean precipitation for the next century, we are looking at the latest AR5 scenario. So the RCP scenario 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, and 8.5 being in red the worst, and the 2.6 the least worst we can say. So you can say that for Canada, temperature will rise by about 10 degrees if we are looking at the RCP 8.5 by 2100, and will rise by about 4 degrees if we are looking at the RCP 2.6. So there's big differences, of course, between the three scenarios. And for precipitation, there will be a slight increase, not very different from a RCP scenario to another, but it's very mild increase. So of course, how this climate change will impact the natural disturbance regime, we can say if we look at some particular natural disturbances here, we'll look at 4 of them in the upcoming slides. For fire, for example, of course, if the temperature is going to rise, the length of the fire season will change and will be much greater in the upcoming years. If we look at when we say fire season, it's the climatic fire season. So, if for example, in 2071, so at the end of the century, well, I'm not able to use the arrow, but let's say here. Well, anyway, okay. Well, anyway, doesn't work. Well, so if we look at the at the end of the century for RCP 8.5, we can see that for most of Canada, actually, the fire season will be longer by at least 30 days, and for some regions it's above 60 days. So that could be very, very large, and of course, an increase in the fire season length and also in temperature that will lead to more severe fire weather. We can see here you have a map of the homogeneous fire regime zone for Canada, and you have the baseline period 1961 to 1990, and if we go through other periods up to 2021 to 2100 on RCP 8.5, and we can see that for most of the area at the end of the century, for most of the homogeneous fire regime zones, there will be at least an increase of 4 times the annual area burn, which is the color here. So the more it's red, the more there is annual area burn. So and in some places, those the fire cycle or the annual area burn will be more than 4% per year. So it's fire cycle of less than 25 years. So it's really, really short fire cycle. If we talk about the Spruce Budworm right now, Spruce Budworm, of course, is mostly affecting the southeastern part of the boreal forest in Canada. It is the most important defoliator, and during the last outbreak in 1970-1980, you have at the upper left, most of the area affected was along the St. Lawrence River and in Ontario. But the latest outbreak that emerged, I would say, in 2006, the first foci are concentrated in you have this on the right part. Well, no, I'm not able to. Of the slide. Most of the foci of the defoliation are appearing north, much northern than where they appeared in the latest in the 1970-1980 outbreak. So we can say that maybe there's a possible northward range extension of the Spruce Budworm. When we look at the projection for the next century, the Spruce Budworm actually will be affected mostly by temperature. In the northern part of its range, it will be mostly affected or limited by the length of the growing season. But at the southern part, it will be also affected by too warm temperature during the winter and during the spring. So if it's too warm, the larvae will deplete its energy reserve, so it won't have enough energy to continue to grow at the spring thereafter and the summer thereafter. So we can see that on the upper side of the slide, you can see that there's the climate envelope, so the climate suitability, which is an index for population growth index, climate proxy for this species, and we can see that this climate envelope is shifting way north according to the RCP 8.5 scenario here. And when we are taking those results and we are projecting using those climate indices to project outbreak duration for the next century, we can see that actually outbreak duration might decrease because actually the climate envelope that is suitable for Spruce Budworm is not overlapping anymore the host species, which is Balsam fir mostly, and white spruce, and to a lesser extent black. For the mountain pine beetle, that's another species that is really climate-driven for those outbreaks. Before 1970, you have at the left the point where there was mountain pine beetle infestation center. You can see that all of them are under the minus 40 isotherm. So during the winter, and during the last few years, the winter temperature were not as low as they were in the before. So, and probably this helped the mountain pine beetle to expand the range of outbreak much northern of what it used to be in the 70s and before, and to east of it. And what are the projections for the future? This is again for the RCP 8.5. There are several climate models that were developed to project future climate suitability for mountain pine beetle. This one is the Safranic model, which is based on the temperature during the summer for flight. So different aspects of weather that is or climate that is affecting both the mountain pine beetle and its host. And you can see that for the baseline, most of the high and extreme climate suitability is restrained to southern Alberta and, of course, within Ontario, BC. But if we go at the end of the century, it's almost orange or red everywhere, so high or extreme climate suitability for mountain pine. Drought is another component of well, it's another quite important natural disturbances in specific location right now in Canada. Most of the, for example, drought may affect tree species that are that can be affected by low precipitation, like aspen and white spruce, for example, along the within the aspen parkland region, so along the prairies and the boreal forest in Saskatchewan and Alberta, for example. You can see that in 2001, 2002, the CMI, which is the climate moisture index, was very, very low there, so representing quite low, well, quite important drought there in 2001, 2002, and it led to severe mortality, and well, severe mortality in some aspen sand along the aspen parkland and boreal forest ecozone. When we are looking at the CMI projection for the next century, again for the RCP 8.5, concentrate on that, you can see that there's some regions, when we are comparing to 1981 and 2010, there are some regions where drought may be developing. So, for example, along the Mackenzie River basin, also in central BC, and some regions also in southern Ontario. So those places might suffer. We can see that there may be some species there that might suffer drought more than they used to be in the past or in the recent decade. So these were examples of indicators of potential forest change for the future, considering climate change. You can find most of this information of a new website that was put online a few weeks ago, which is the Forest Change Indicators website. You have the address there, the website there. You can access there to different information about the natural disturbance, the projection of natural disturbance regarding climate change. So there's a lot of information there, and that could be a good place to learn a little bit more about those natural disturbances. So now it will be Sylvie that will continue the rest of the talk.
Yeah, so as Jan showed us, we can see that there's a lot of disturbances that are occurring in the Canadian landscape, and that can compete with the harvesting that we conduct in the commercial forest of Canada. And when we put all the disturbance together, we see that the exposure to those change will be quite heterogeneous across the country, because the projected level and the timing of the change in disturbance will not be homogeneous throughout the country. And we worked on trying to see to accumulate the disturbances to see what the impact could be on the forest and our ability to continue the harvesting that we currently do in there. And we, as foresters, we know that what we are doing now in the forest will be ready to harvest in 70 to 90 years. So what we do now will be important for the future. So we have two recent products that help us conducting the work that I will show in the next few slides. And one is was provided by the work of André Baudouin and colleagues, which provide information across the country in terms of volume, age, and composition at the 260-meter resolution, which is very useful when we try to do what I will show you in a minute. And also another product by Luc Guindon and colleagues, which identified the area that were burned, flood, or harvested from 2001 to 2010. And the availability of that information allowed us, for instance, to look at the potential to maintain the current harvesting level in the future if we consider fire. So I will just briefly go over that paper that was published last year in CGFR. And here you see the annual area burn. So you have the baseline on the top right panel. And as Jan showed earlier, in the future, using the extreme RCP scenario, we see that the annual area burn and the number of fires that occur in the country will increase quite considerably. So there will be a change in fire regime, and as we progress in time, fire and harvesting will be competing much more than they are currently. So what we did in the CGFR paper was to look at compare the potential harvesting level based on the productive capacity of the landscape, and I don't have time to go into much details here, but I can talk about that a bit more later. But and we compared the current harvesting that was occurring between 2001 and 2010 to the potential. And if you are in the green area, it means that you are harvesting below 75% of the potential that the forest. So you're conducting sustainable forest management. But if you're in the yellow, you're at between 75 and 125. So you are at the level. And the situation where you harvest too much above 125 is not illustrated here. So currently, under the current fire regime, most of the area where we harvest, we are at below 25% of the productive capacity of the land base. So we classify that into the low vulnerability. But in the next few slides, I'll take into account the change that we see in future fire regimes. See if we could maintain, if the forest was exposed, the current forest was exposed to the fire condition that we project for the future, if we could maintain the harvesting level. So on this panel, you have on the top left the previous condition I showed you for the baseline. Then for 2025, 2055, and 2085, which are the center of the three periods that we looked at. And you can see, not even, doesn't want to come. So if you look at the first period, you see that the portion of Quebec and British Columbia are turning into the high to extreme vulnerability, and this is getting worse if time goes by. So it means that it would be difficult in those regions to maintain the current harvesting level if the vegetation was the same as right now and the productivity was the same as right now. So one thing that we wanted to do with this project was see to look at what could be the cumulative impacts of the disturbance that Jan just showed you. So we wanted to delineate different regions where the several disturbance regimes are homogeneous. We wanted to take into account that the cumulative impact of disturbance may not necessarily be additive. So some species will be susceptible to the same disturbance, and the forest will not die twice, it will die once. And we wanted to evaluate what's going to change in the future and what could be the adaptation that we could put in place now to face the projection. And remember that we focus on a large scale assessment, so we did that for the commercial forest of the country. So we used the disturbance that Jan talked about earlier, so drought, mountain pine beetle, fire, spruce budworm, and we include harvesting, the current level of harvesting in our estimation. And the first thing we wanted to do was to delineate homogeneous regions. So again, I don't have much time to go into the details, but we have produced an index of forest exposure to these disturbances, and we've done a clustering, a spatial constraint clustering analysis to derive those 18 regions which have an homogeneous disturbance regime. So each of the color on the central map corresponds to a region that has a similar disturbance regime. So now we ask ourselves, how do we accumulate the disturbance? And what we wanted to assess was the amount of volume that would be at risk for those disturbances in the currently and in the future. And some disturbances such as drought, for instance, and mountain pine beetles can be affecting the same volume, the pine volume. So if you look on the left panel and focus on BC, for instance, you see that there's a high volume that would be, thank you. Someone is able to
Yes.
use the mouse for me.
Yes, I'm hoping that it will work now. Can you try it now? There we go.
Yes, it does.
There we go. Perfect.
So if you focus here, you see that there's a volume that would be at risk from drought, but the same volume is also at risk from mountain pine beetle. So we didn't want to add this volume, but take into account that that's the same volume that would be at risk of both disturbances. So we did it that way. So first, you have to remember that we keep the vegetation as if it was as it was in 2001. We have kept the same harvesting rate throughout, and all other disturbances will be changing as a function of the projection we have for them, and we make an estimation for each 30-year period. So harvesting is considered as a disturbance that is independent from the other. So it means that we harvest the forest, and no other disturbance affects the harvesting stand. So it means that we did not consider salvage logging. Now, fire is occurring, let's say, over 25% of the area. So fire would burn randomly 25% of the area, but would burn a portion of the landscape that is also affected by insect and drought. So a proportion that is affected by insect and drought would be burned. and insect and drought for a particular species that is affected by the insect. The volume will be considered the same because we cannot distinguish if the volume is at risk from insect or drought, and we do not want to double count it. So those are the results for the projection. So okay. So this is the baseline. And you have the expression of volume at risk in terms of color over there. So what you see is that just a small part of central Canada is at the as 80 to 100% of the volume that is at risk. But otherwise, we currently, or in the baseline condition, the situation is not that bad. Now, for 2011 to 2040, you see that a higher proportion in central Canada becomes at risk, and it gets worse as time goes by. Just to be able to better look at the results, we have made a summary in 3 large regions, so central Canada, western Canada, and eastern Canada. And what you have in green here is the proportion of volume that is not at risk for the region, and it allows you to see how it changed over time and how important are the risks in the region. So if we looked at the western area, you will see an increase in fire, drought, and mountain pine beetle. And even at the end of the period, there's still about half of the volume that would not be at risk, but you can see that the risks are changing. Remember that harvesting level remains fixed throughout, but you can see that, for instance, drought and mountain pine beetle take a highest share of the disturbance that we would see over there. So if we look now at the central Canada, which is probably the area where the situation would worsen the fastest and would get really bad by 2011, you can see that drought and fire are increasing considerably through time, taking a lot of, or being almost in competition with harvesting. Whereas for eastern Canada, we would suspect an increase in fire, but a decrease in Spruce Budworm over time. So that's just to give an overview of what the risks are in those areas. So overall, the volume, and you have to remember that the exercise was conducted as if the current vegetation was submitted to the future disturbance. The volume that would be exposed to those disturbances would increase in the future, so the competition among harvesting and disturbances would increase. Central Canada is one region where, particularly because of drought and fire, the exposure to risk is the highest, but some regions of BC and Quebec are also at risk at the end of the century. And again, I want to stress that the nature of the risk is different among regions. So here are just a few examples of adaptation measures. So the nature of the risk can help in choosing what are the strategies that we could put in place to face those risks. So for instance, you could favor less flammable species in an area where fire risk is expected to increase. And those are things that you can do on the ground, but I guess one of the adaptation option that is probably going to be robust is to consider the fact that we will probably, our harvesting will probably compete with other disturbances. So we have to take that into account in all our planning phase. forestry. So, of course, there's a number of limitations with this quite simple approach. Harvesting and species composition were maintained fixed. We didn't consider salvage. The vegetation did not change. We also use only a limited number of disturbances, and there are other disturbances out there. But there's also some surprises that may occur. So some species that we currently do not foresee could come from the south because temperature is increasing, or some of the wintering barrier could be left off, and we didn't consider that. So in concluding, I want to acknowledge many people that have contributed to many models or elements of that that presentation, and I want to direct you to a number of papers, but also the website, the indicator one that Jan discussed about earlier, and some of the tools that we have produced within the Forest Change project, which is looking at how climate change may impact the forest and the forest sector, and at some options for adaptation. So if I can finish with that, maybe I would already ask people if they find the approach interesting, and if they thought that if they thought about some adaptation options they could put in their own land base based on this information. So thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much, Sylvie and Jan. Okay, so we now have about 20 minutes or so left for any questions and answers. So again, if you'd like to use the chat box, please feel free to go ahead and type out your question in there, and then we can read it out loud for everybody. If you're on the conference call line with us, I'm going to prefer to ask a question over the phone. All you're going to have to do is hit *6, and that will unmute the phone line. So is there anybody who would like to start us off? I see some people typing in the chat box. So for now, is there anybody on the conference call line that would like to ask a question? If so, go right ahead. Everybody's very quiet. Okay, we'll wait for some questions to come in here. So Andrew Park. So yes, this presentation will be made available online. I will have a recording of it available later this afternoon. Okay, so Florence Days has a question here. So
hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yes, you already have a question. Please go ahead. I have a question. We are in Ottawa, in the headquarters building. I'm with Federal Geospatial Platform, and from this information point of view, what you have done is just fantastic. I think this is a very, very strong indicator to the government and to citizens that climate change is an issue that we need to address, and adaptation is important. And I do have one question. When we look from the information, for public point of view, my question to you is, among the range of global circulation models, the climate circulation models that are available and the simulations produced, I assume you have used the Canadian Earth system model text version. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yeah. And have you tested that the output of this Canadian model versus other models from UK or from Australia, from US, whether they have similar spatial patterns for the area that you're looking at for Canada? Because spatial pattern here appears to be crucial, right?
Yes, they are. I'm not very familiar with other models, actually, I would say, but if I recall right, there could be some quite large differences, for example, in precipitation. I think that the Canadian model is quite high on the precipitation side, whereas other models are projecting less precipitation for Canada. So, of course, if you have a more complete view of the uncertainties regarding the climate scenarios, that would be better, of course, to look at other GCM. And if we are considering that the Canadian model is soft, I would say, on precipitation, that would mean that droughts, for example, or even fire could be more important if we are using other GCM.
And maybe just a note, I think that some of those comparisons have been made for particular disturbances. For instance, for fire, there has been a number of papers comparing different GCMs. Here we chose to use the Canadian one and have a comparison between the 2.6 and the RCP 2.6 and RC 8.5, but we didn't do the comparison. So again, it also stress, I guess, the necessity also to define adaptation options that are robust to a number of situations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I understand the comparison of this is not a small task, but I wonder, do you have any plans to go further? Or maybe existing literature, see whether there is this kind of comparison already happened between different models for Canada. You already said some of these, yeah, I understand. But for Canada, these 3 regions as you have identified, I guess most likely they are typical from other models as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Sylvie, Dan McIsaac in Edmonton.
Hi, Dan.
I have a question for you. Now that you're unmuzzled, which is really wonderful to hear, what has been the response to your research?
Sorry? What has been the response?
Yes.
I mean, it's well received everywhere that I have presented it. I'm not sure I understand that clearly your question.
Well, under the Harper government, scientists were not allowed to talk about their science. I remember when your paper came out, I heard about it in the U.S., but not in Canada. And my question is, now that you're able to talk freely about it, what type of response are you getting from your audiences?
That's the reason why I'm here today, or I was out there weeks ago. I guess people that it depends on the audience. The scientific audience have read the paper and commented on it directly to me. The general public sometimes is just freshly or the information is just fresh to them, so they need to think a bit about it. I mean, we've presented it to a diversity of audience, and sometimes it resonates because people have thought about it for a certain time, and sometimes it just needs to be digested a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Any other questions on the conference call line before I get to the questions in the chat box here? If not, I will come back just at the end just to see if there are more questions. So,
Hi, this is Michael Leach, calling in from Ottawa. I'm with the Earth Sciences sector in the policy group, and typically look at disaster risk reduction and emergency management. I'm very curious, when you were measuring risk, are you talking about, I thought I heard you say risk to harvest. So are you looking at it from the perspective of, lower timber products or whatever, or also are you also looking at risk to communities or to critical infrastructure or any of those other issues?
So the presentation here was focusing mostly on because we do have products that now allow us to look at what volume is out there and to get some assessment of what volume could be at risk for those disturbances. So we focus on that. With regard to fire, for instance, we do have the information that is, we are currently trying to define risk around communities based on the projection, but also on the current vegetation around the communities. And I think the information that we produce can be used to assess, for instance, the infrastructure at risk in the face of fire. But I'm not sure that I'm the best person to think about risk to infrastructure, but probably the people that have knowledge about infrastructure can use the information we produce to do a better assessment of that type of risk. So I'm not sure I'm answering.
Yes, no.
Jan and I are totally willing to provide the expertise about fire, for instance, to the people or with health, community health consideration, but I'm not the health person.
Yes, I can see. I can see that the study, obviously looked at those cumulative or additive risk from various things like drought, fire, and that the study, could be extrapolated. But it seems to me that, when you look at things like emergency management, response, recovery, and so forth, that the implications of your study would seem to say that there would be an awful lot of stresses on the ability of the country to respond to any of these cumulative risks over time, dependent, of course, on the degree of climate change increase and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
That's right.
Great.
Thank you for an interesting presentation.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Mike. Any other questions on the conference call line? Okay. So we have a couple of questions here in the chat box. So Florence Davies, a quick question for Jan. So when looking at the overlap of the SBW and climate envelope, do the models also consider the potential movement of the trees over time as well?
To answer your question, Florence, no, actually it didn't consider the movement of the trees. So we considered the baseline or the current forest composition to project future outbreak duration, for example, in our projections. But what we can say about this is that if we are considering the climate, the potential tree distribution for the future, actually it could be outbreak duration could be even less than that, because if we are concentrating on for example, on the commercial forest, where there's currently balsam fir and white spruce, for example, under warming, those species will have much more difficulties to grow, and there could be much more mortality in the future. So there could be even less vulnerability of the forest to the spruce budworm if we are actually considering the impact of climate change on the growth and the mortality of the host species themselves. We could also consider, as you say, the tree movement to the north. But if you recall the figure that I presented before, you may see that the climate envelope for the suitable climate for spruce budworm is actually shifting north by several hundreds of kilometers. Maybe I think it was almost 800 kilometers or even more under our RCP. What is it? RCP 8.5. So, and we can say that the movement of the trees for example, balsam fir or black spruce for the upcoming century won't be as much as this. So there would be definitely an overlap disruption, I would say, between the host and the suitable climate conditions for spruce budworm in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jan. So we have another question here. So from Krishna. So are you considering fire as natural fire?
I'm not sure exactly about the question, but we made the projection based on the escape fires, so all the fires that have exceeded 200 hectares. So those are the fires that we were not able to suppress fast, and these fires being ignited by human or not doesn't make much sense. They grow that fast because the weather conditions are conducive to fire. So I'm not sure if it was the sense of the question, but
Okay, well, Krishna, if you can clarify if we've answered your question, that would be great. But for now, I guess we'll move to Benjamin's question here. Regarding the adaptation options you considered, did you ID any options that applied to multiple or all regions? So other than the principles type of options, such as, so quote unquote, do adaptive management?
well, I think that one of the things is really, I think we have to start thinking that disturbances will occur in our land base, which land base it is, and so we have to consider it in all the planning phase. That's one thing that need to be considered. One thing, and it's really not my field, but I think if we can think of, okay, because harvesting will probably be in competition with more disturbances in the future. I think that if we can produce more value with less volume, will probably be good. So maybe we can start thinking about how much value can we produce with less volume. Maybe we need to change the way we do planning, considering the fact that these disturbances are there and they are probably there to forever. So I'd say that thinking about disturbance in all the phase of management is certainly an adaptive option, and one that is no regret.
Perfect.
Maybe I can plug, there's an adaptation table that is available with the tools that we have, and you can play with it based on the disturbances or the elements that you think your forest will be affected by in the future, and try to see what are the adaptations that others have proposed for this particular event or impact. And one of the things that I would like is having people that have thought about other adaptation options to enrich that list of proposed adaptation options.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Sylvie. So we have one last question, it looks like. So Kirk Schmidt, so the results presented are based on RCP 8.5. So have you looked at lower RCP levels such as 6.0?
Yes, actually, we have for the natural disturbances that we are projected here in-house, I would say, we have those projections available for RCP 2.6 and RCP 4.5. So again, according to the Canadian GCM. So if anyone is want to have those results, we can provide them for free. I mean, they are available. But now we didn't estimate the volume at risk according to other RCP scenario. But I think that we have only the 8.5 at the moment. But that's definitely something that could be possible, of course, for the RCP to estimate. I mean, the volumetric according to the RCP 2.6 and RCP 4.5. I don't think we have the RCP 1.0.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Okay, last call for any questions. I can see some people typing. Last call for any questions over the conference call line. Okay. Last call, either the chat box or the conference call line.
Okay, yeah, again, it's signing down with FDP, Federal Geospatial Platform. I wonder how the model that you have used to produce all these outbreaks and renders and from. I assume the publication must have included the model validation. So validation of the models that you use for projection using historical data.
So you're asking if each of the disturbance model that we use to project the future disturbance has been validated. Did I understand right?
Yeah, using historical baseline data.
It's very difficult to hear you because there's noise in your room.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. Your understanding of my question is correct. I wonder the model you use for future projections have been validated for the baseline or historical period.
Yeah, actually, the model that we are using, they were validated. I mean, the disturbance projections for disturbance were validated using the baseline information about. So the information that was already available to build those models and to validate them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and from FDP, from Federal Geospatial Platform point of view, this is just an input. I would think that if you could map the historical 30-year period in 3 maps, for example, 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, showing how the pattern might be going along with the longer term projection you are developing here. I thought that would be a historical evidence of these pattern change, spatial pattern change. This is just the input, my comment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for the questions. Okay, I guess we're just about out of time here, so I guess we'll wrap things up. So thanks to everybody who joined us today for the FACoP webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. And a very big thank you goes out to you, Sylvie and Jan, for your time and effort for a great and informative presentation. So any last comments from either of you before we wrap up here?
Just thanks to everyone, and I want to recall that this work is really a team success. Can I say no? Teamwork at least. So I want to acknowledge the work of my group. Yeah.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay, well, great. So thanks everybody who joined in. That's it for us today. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you again next time.